I hear a different Sabbath school teacher, and some churches, they look to find someone to teach because they don't have too many people that are willing to do it, and I'm glad that you have. And I'm glad the cello came back. I like other instruments. I play trumpet myself, or I try, but the cello just seems to be a very special sound. And I hope the violinists and the flutists don't feel offended. And I can't imagine all the things you have to do, how you hold your hand and the vibration and everything on those string instruments. It's an ability beyond what I could ever hope to master. In heaven. In heaven, well, it will take a long time though. Have you ever considered how difficult it is to define terms that we are familiar with, but which simply defy an explanation? How would you define such words as love, faith, or hope? Many attempts have been made to define religious liberty. The World Council of Churches has invested much time and effort to define religious liberty, as have governmental bodies. It is not an easy task. Even more difficult has been the process of coming up with a law that would promote and protect religious liberty. On June 8 of 1789, James Madison introduced the first draft of what would become the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, a part of the Bill of Rights. After 3.5 months of debate, the final version was agreed to on September 25, 1798. The provision regarding religious liberty reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." These 16 words have defined religious liberty in the United States for the past 222 years. As you will note, religious liberty is defined in two parts. First, the government has no right to promote or to establish religion. That is the task given to the churches. Second, government may not interfere with one's practice or exercise of religion. We could spend hours discussing what these terms mean, but I think the best way to understand them is by looking at two court cases. The establishment of religion is illustrated by a case from California, and the free exercise of religion is shown by a case from Massachusetts. Candlestick Park in San Francisco, California, purchased a new boom truck. The operator of the truck decided to test out its crane by moving a stone traffic barrier. He placed it in an upright position in a wooded section behind the Japanese tea garden. Some Hindu worshipers saw it and thought it was a shrine to their god, Shiva. The stone attracted many pilgrims from as far away as India. Many prayed at the shrine and offered offerings such as flowers and food and coins. The Hindus were joined by the Buddhists and the New Agers in worshiping the stone. The city officials became upset and ordered the stone to be removed. They're concerned that this was a worship site in violation of the separation of church and state. the establishment of religion. Certainly, no one felt threatened or coerced to worship the stone barrier. There was no evidence that the city of San Francisco was endorsing the worship of Shiva. But the city officials said, religion does not belong on public property. A federal lawsuit was filed by a New Age Hindu, Kailas Das. When he got a legal bill for $14,400, he decided to settle the case. The lawsuit was dropped, and Kailas took the rock to his house. A Muslim from Massachusetts traveled to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire to present a lecture. On his return trip by bus, he occupied his time by reading the Quran. When the bus crossed the border into Massachusetts, he was arrested by law enforcement officials. He ended up in federal court, where he was represented by his Jewish Orthodox attorney before an African-American judge who was an expert in civil rights. The attorney told the judge, if you send my client to jail, you will have to put me in the jail cell next to him. The judge, with some humor, asked the federal prosecutor if Rosa Parks was on the same bus. For those of you who may have forgotten your history, Rosa Parks was the lady down south back in the days of the civil rights wars who sat on the wrong seat in a bus in protest that blacks were not allowed to sit up front. The prosecutor did not immediately answer, and the judge, after a few moments, became a bit impatient, and he asked the young lady, he says, what are you looking for? And she was leafing through her papers, and she says, well, I'm looking to see if Rosa Parks is on my witness list. The Muslim was allowed to go free. Until a few years ago, most non-Christian citizens in the United States were willing to let Christians worship as they chose to do so. It was not a big issue that the United States had many government-approved references to the Christian religion. Our Pledge of Allegiance referred to God. We put God, in God we trust, in our coins. Prayer to God was offered during public events. At Christmas time, our public school children sang Christmas carols that were religious. But that tolerant atmosphere has changed. Non-believers are continually going to court in attempts to delete all references to the Christian religion by our government. For a while, the opponents of Christianity were content to let Christians worship, as long as they did so within the church building. Their attitude was, just don't confront us with your religion. Now, they want to control our worship services. The city of Houston, Texas, issued subpoenas demanding that ministers turn over any sermons dealing with homosexuality or gender identity. The ministers stood up for their rights and refused to comply, and the mayor was forced to rescind the order. The hostility of those who oppose religious freedom was shown on a case that was decided on June 4 of 2018 by our Supreme Court. Two men visited a cake shop in Colorado and asked Jack Phillips, the owner, to design a custom cake for their marriage celebration. Phillips told them, "I'll make you birthday cakes, shower cakes, sell you cookies and brownies. I just don't make cakes for same-sex weddings." Phillips is willing to serve any customer, but he is not willing to serve any message. For him to design a wedding cake for a same-sex couple would be contrary to his deeply held religious beliefs. Jack is a Christian. He won't do custom work for events that are contrary to his religious conscience. He doesn't do Halloween cakes. He won't bake cakes with alcohol. He has refused to bake a divorce celebration cake because he believes marriage is sacred, instituted by God. For Phillips to design a cake that was contrary to his religious beliefs would violate his freedom of religion and his freedom of speech under the First Amendment to the Constitution. The men who were not sold a cake filed a complaint with the Colorado Human Rights Commission. They claimed that no one should have to face the shame, embarrassment, and humiliation of being told, "We don't serve your kind here." This statement failed to acknowledge that Phillips did not refuse to serve the men. He told them he would sell them anything that was in his shop. He simply refused to design a cake that contained a message that was contrary to his religious beliefs. Their complaint overlooked the shame, embarrassment, and humiliation and outright intimidation and abuse that their vocal supporters inflicted on Phillips. Phillips received more than one death threat. He had to stop baking cakes, which reduced his profits by 40%. He laid off half of his employees. The Colorado Human Rights Commission ruled against Phillips. He was ordered to make compliance reports to the state for 2 years. And he was ordered to do retraining sessions for his employees, several of whom are family members. He would be required under this order to tell his daughter that their family's religious beliefs were wrong because the state says so. The charge of discrimination was upheld by the Colorado Supreme Court. But the United States Supreme Court reversed the decision and ruled that Phillips was the one who was discriminated against. He had not received a fair hearing. Two members of the Colorado Human Rights Commission made quite hostile remarks against Christianity. One commissioner said, "Freedom of religion and religion has been used to justify all kinds of discrimination throughout history, whether it be slavery, whether it be the Holocaust." Richard Epstein, a law professor at New York University, responded to this statement by saying, "Hitler did not kill 6,000 Jews by refusing to patronize Jewish bakers." Another member of the commission said, Phillips can believe what he wants to believe, but cannot act on his religious beliefs if he decides to do business in this state. It appears that the case was decided in part on the basis that the Colorado Commission was extremely inconsistent when it decided on 3 separate occasions that a baker was justified in refusing to bake a cake with images that contained disapproval of same-sex marriage, along with religious text. The commissioners engaged in what judges call impermissible viewpoint discrimination when it allowed these bakers not to serve customers whose views it found offensive, while disciplining Jack, whose beliefs the commission found distasteful. In a similar case in Ireland, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom ruled 5-0 that a bakery could not be penalized for declining to create a cake bearing the message, "Support gay marriage." The owners of the bakery are committed Christians who close their business on Sunday. They will create cakes for anyone, but they have refused on several occasions to create cakes featuring nudity and profanity. The court said the bakery owners were entitled to decline to supply a cake iced with a message with which they profoundly disagreed. Nicholas Merriweather, a philosophy professor at Ohio State University for over 20 years, seeks to teach his students respect and good manners. He uses formal address with his students, referring to them as sir or ma'am. Merriweather is a Christian who believes this practice aligns with his interpretation of Genesis 1:27. This practice has not been controversial until recently. During a political philosophy class, Merriweather responded to a male student's question by saying, "Yes, sir." The student later confronted the professor and insisted on being addressed as a woman. The school threatened an investigation if he did not comply. Before he had a chance to reply, an investigation was started. Merriweather proposed to compromise by using the student's first or last name. This offer was rejected by the school. He was told that he must use the pronoun the student prefers. The professor filed an internal grievance only to have the provost openly laugh at his religious beliefs. A lawsuit has been filed against the school for compelling Merriweather to violate his First Amendment rights. Tom Rost is the director of a funeral home. For 100 years, his home has ministered to grieving families. The home sets a high professional standard. The employees are expected to behave in a professional, caring manner. There is a dress code and guidelines for walking people through the grieving process. These guidelines are explained to prospective employees. No one joins the team without agreeing to them. One of the employees, Anthony Stevens, expressed his decision to begin dressing and presenting as a woman during interactions with grieving families. Mr. Ross was concerned for the well-being of Mr. Stevens. He was concerned for his female employees who would be sharing the restroom with Stevens. And he was concerned about the people whom the funeral home serves. His decision was not to go along with Stevens' proposal. Stevens filed a complaint with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He claimed that his sexual rights had been violated, but the law had not been violated. Sex in federal employment law refers to whether one is biologically male or female. A business has the right to adopt and enforce a sex-specific dress code. But the EEOC decided to interpret sex to mean gender identity. Then the EEOC decided that the funeral home was right. But the ACLU decided to bring a lawsuit on behalf of Stevens. A federal court ruled against the funeral home. The case was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court and was heard in a court session last October. Pharmacists in Washington State were told by a federal court that they must dispense abortion-inducing medication, despite their deeply held religious beliefs, and despite the fact that the pharmacist who was being sued referred his customers to 30 other pharmacies within a 5-mile radius. The United States Supreme Court refused to hear the case. A dissenting justice, Justice Alito, said, "If this is a sign of how our religious liberty claims will be treated in the years ahead, those who value religious liberty have cause for great concern." He later said in a speech to attorneys in Washington, D.C., "I am reminded of a song. It's not dark yet, but it's getting there." I am indebted to Mary Eberstadt, the author of It's Dangerous to Believe, Religious Freedom and Its Enemies, for the following thoughts on an enemy of religious freedom. When one considers the drastic changes concerning the legalization of same-sex marriage, the campaign to open public bathrooms to everyone, and the issues raised by transgenderism, the question is asked, how did this social revolution over sex happen so quickly? The answer is that this cultural shift has been underway for decades. For more than half a century, the secularists have been forming their own religion. Its fundamental faith is that all forms of consenting, non-marital sex are acceptable. Traditional restrictions and attitudes are viewed as judgmental and moral aggression against others, especially women and sexual minorities. The first commandment of this new secularism is that no sexual act between consenting adults is wrong. Nothing is inherently wrong that will promote this belief. This new faith will not even draw the line at what is known as partial birth abortion, a practice that Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a liberal, called close to infanticide. Abortion has attained the status of a religious ritual. It is a communal right. The sexual revolution has become the single most deadly enemy of Christianity. This new religion is aimed at safeguarding its own body of revealed and developed truths, and silencing and punishing competitors. There is a certain kind of logic that rules this society. If you are against abortion, therefore you are anti-woman. If you oppose same-sex marriage, therefore you hate people attracted to the same sex. The so-called culture war, in other words, has not been conducted by people of religious faith on one side and people of no faith on the other side. It is instead a contest of competing faiths, one in the good book and the other in this newly written figurative book about the sexual revolution. If government gets to define what sex is, then government will be allowed to decide who a parent is and who gets to raise our children. Steve Tenz owns a 120-acre farm in Michigan. Steve expressed his view that marriage is between one man and one woman on the farm's Facebook page. A town official in East Lansing, 22 miles away, warned Steve that if he sold his fruit at the farmer's market, it could incite protest. No one protested, and Steve continued to sell his organic apples, peaches, cherries, and pumpkins. Then the city officials in East Lansing moved to ban Steve's farm from participating in the farmer's market. The city cited its Human Relations Ordinance, an anti-discrimination law that includes sexual orientation. Steve and his wife sued the city for discrimination. The lawsuit says that Steve and his wife support the rights of citizens and other businesses to express their views about marriage. Polly Olson has handed out Valentine's cards that say, "Jesus loves you." She does this on the campus of Northeast Wisconsin Technical College and has done so since 2009. Recently, she was stopped by campus security and taken to the security office. She was accused of being a disruptive student and told that she could only hand out these cards in a so-called free speech zone. This area may be reserved between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. for up to 3 consecutive days. The area is about the size of 2 buses placed next to each other. Polly sued the school, saying that the vast majority of the campus cannot be made into a non-speech zone. The judge agreed with Polly. He ruled that the college had no more right to prevent her from handing out individual Valentine cards than it did to stop her from wishing each individual to have a good morning and a blessed day. My appeal to you is that you will pray for those who are standing up for religious freedom. Jack Phillips, the cake baker, is still being threatened.